So this is branding. So double check, there was a little bit confusion around some of the room assignments. So is everybody in the right place? Okay. I'm not going to stand up here and read everybody's bio because we really want to dive into the talking points and hear from these great people. I'm really excited to have Alex Steed here. Came up from Portland this morning, but he's splitting his time between Maine and Tennessee now. So I really appreciate his commitment to being here, so thank you, Alex. And Gabrielle Melchionda is here as well. You might know her brand of products, Mad Gabs. It's been around for a long time, so she's got a lot of different stories to share with us today. And Josh Rogers, who is going to talk a little bit about all different types of branding. He's trying to brand Seaweed in Maine. So I can't wait to hear about that piece. So thank you for being here today. And Alex, it's Steve.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Oh, come on. I moved to Nashville and Lisa asked me to come to this and I said I absolutely wanted to come. And I wanted to come because you're artists, and I don't say that to pander, I say that because I do a lot of corporate events and those are terrible. And so this is much nicer, it's a much nicer crowd. There's a coast in Maine, I don't know if you're familiar with how lucky you are living next to all that water, but I didn't research that when I moved to Tennessee. So fortunately there's music. I'm excited for a couple of things. I'm excited to hear about Mad Gabs, specifically because Mad Gabs was the first brand, we didn't talk about this at all, this is a surprise to you, but Mad Gabs was the first brand I knew about that came out of Portland from a human being. And it was the first product where it was like, oh, there's a human behind that. And I could actually understand what that meant, and that you as an individual could be responsible for giving life to a company and giving life to a product. So you were formative in my growth, and so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And then I'm excited for Josh too, because in addition to other things, I do a lot of things. Like we all do things, you know. And one of the things, this doesn't go higher, but I'm a freak show of a tall person, so. One of the things that I do is I have an annual gift guide. It's called the Maine Made Gift Guide, and my company, Knack Factory, puts it out for a long time. The Bangor Daily News put it out. Other people put it out. You know how it is these days. You're lucky if you have a home on the internet for more than a year. So the Maine Made Gift Guide's been out for 7 or 8 years. I came across Josh's product through the Maine Made Gift Guide, and Josh, there's 3 kinds of people that appear in a gift guide. There's people who don't have any web presence and you really want to feature their stuff, but you can't because there's no pictures on the internet and there's no information about their product, and you have to spend a lot of time trying to make that happen, and eventually you don't want to because you have 250 other people to feature. There are people who make all that stuff available but are moderately non-responsive, and it can be hard to prioritize sort of what they have to offer. And then there's Josh, who was in touch and found an opportunity through which his product could be shown off and reached out and certainly became a priority gift as far as I'm concerned every year as a result. Josh is extraordinary at representing a product, probably in part, well, I mean, Josh's experience sort of speaks for itself, but probably also in part because selling seaweed as an edible before the newer green edibles is a bit of a task. I bet was on the front end and still might be a little bit. So Josh is very good at that, and his experience will help you figure out how to sell your seaweed tea of art, you know. So this is me in a bus. No, this is me in a Winnebago. I don't know why I used this slide. I like this slide because it's not necessarily super becoming. It's my friend Silas Haggerty. Silas Haggerty is this guy who has a film school in Keyser Falls, and he's a documentary filmmaker, and he has a film school in Keyser Falls for kids. And for fun, during the summer, I'm a huge believer in diversifying your experience as much as possible as a means of having an interesting story. When you hear not as a means of having an interesting story, but as a means of having an interesting life. If you have an interesting life, you can tell an interesting story. I think the reason a lot of people get like bummed out about branding conversations is because it sounds like you're making up a thing that doesn't exist. You know, like you're trying to pretend like you're professional, which I'm, you know, ish. And you're trying to pretend like people should trust you with their ideas and their products, and they should, but their idea of who they should trust versus who you actually are sometimes feels a little different. I am, as I believe we probably all are on some level, a sufferer of imposter syndrome. Every single day I wake up, and this will be the day that I get found out. And if it's going to be one of you who exposes me, do it now, because just get it over with. But anyway, so part of my thing that I do that's not working for a company called Knack Factory, which I promise I'll get to, is I take a vacation in the summer and I work at a music festival in Kezar Falls called the Ossipee Valley Music Festival. It's not really in Kezar Falls, it's in Hiram, but you know me in geography. And last year, my friend Silas, so I work at this music festival, I run their food program. 8 years ago, none of their food came from farms. 8 years into my working there, 30 farmers supply the food at the music festival. So that's what I do for fun. You know, hang out with musicians and sell them food from farmers. But here I'm staying in my friend Silas's Winnebago for a week and a half. I don't know if you see everyone's favorite, like, laugh, love, much, live, laugh, love is over on the corner. This is a mural of collies. Like, I can't imagine a more 70s situation than a teal Winnebago with a wheat paste mural of collies, but that's what's happening in there for some reason. And that's sort of an introduction to who I am on a personal level. So here are some things that I do. In addition to this company called Knack Factory, which again, I promise I'll get to, I just launched a podcast literally yesterday called Nashville Demystified. Like I said, I moved to a new city. I don't know anything about the new city, and I'm using that as producing a podcast as an excuse to get to know the new city. Nashville's really interesting because it's essentially the Los Angeles of music, even though LA is the Los Angeles of music. But Nashville's like the Los Angeles of music that doesn't know that it's the Los Angeles of music, and you can just reach out to like famous people and they'll hang out with you and talk about stuff. It's insane. Like I don't even know how it's a thing, but I've been producing this podcast as an excuse to like find out about the history of the city. There's an amazing musician named John Hartford who I did a profile and episode on that comes out on Monday. Hopefully you'll check it out, but this just gives us a sense that I am not only the owner of a corporate video production company, but I do other things. I went on a date last year and a woman called me an eloquent fatalist, and and she wasn't a branding professional. I almost called this website insolent trash, which someone else called me once. And actually in the design on the side is the word insolent trash cut into a design. But sometimes like you try too hard to figure out what you are, and if you spend enough time with other people, they'll tell you exactly what you are. So I think like a big secret to proper branding is to just shutting up, which you'll find surprising after listening to me for 25 minutes. But it's just shutting up and being with other people and understanding yourself in the context of other people. So this is my personal website, which I launched the other day. I used to be a columnist and a blogger for the Bangor Daily News, which is how this gift guide happened. And the news can never really figure out what it's doing, so I'm not anymore. And I just found like being a columnist exhausting. I don't know if you've been aware of what's going on politically for the past 2 years. We don't have to get into it. You've heard about it. But that's a tiring thing to talk about. Like it's an exhausting and emotionally devastating thing to live through, let alone talk about, let alone sort through it, let alone have people threaten your life because you have an opinion about it. So I have a personal website now that nobody reads, and I put all my ideas and feelings on, and nobody says, the Trump train's coming for you, Steed, watch out. So this is a lot more fun way of having fun fun of my personal life that helps me express stuff. And then finally, I'm glad, did this, hold on. Oh no, you know how you design such a nice thing on what's it called? Not PowerPoint, but the one for Apple, the one where they're like, slide, Keynote. They're like, we have our own one that once you email it, it'll look nothing like your original piece. That's me blaming Apple for me getting Lisa my slides 9 days late. So Knack Factory is a company that's based in Portland. It's a video production company. We started in 2012. We started sort of unofficially as a bunch of people who worked together in 2010. We are not a branding company, so don't be like, branding expert Alex Steed said this thing. But we've been around a lot of brands as a result of communicating on their behalf. We work with amazing branding companies in Portland and elsewhere, and we think a lot about how people present themselves in the world, and we think a lot about how we present ourselves in the world as a company. Because, like, end of the day, there's a video guy here, there's a photographer. End of the day, just like close your eyes and think about video production, like nothing stands out. Like, it's like a person with some gear, and maybe they've made some stuff that looks good and sounds good. Maybe they've made some stuff that really impresses you. But like when you have to like actually think about who you're going to hire as a video production company, the same way you think about whose art you're going to buy or whose services you're going to use. At least in those areas, there's some stuff that sticks out. In video production, largely firms look sort of similar, they seem sort of similar, unless they're really big and then they're sort of out of reach. It's hard to stand out. And so we have thought a lot about, based on the advice and expertise that we think that we offer to our clients, how we stand out as well. And so I'm going to talk through some of that. But the point of me talking through this is to say, and we were talking about this earlier, and hopefully we can underscore this, I think there's a ton of anxiety around talking about and thinking about yourself as a brand. Is that true? You have immediate laughter, and I like that. I think there's several reasons for it. I think one is it can be weird and feel inauthentic. I think that's a huge piece. And I think the other piece is that we are constantly told every 3 months, and 3 months is like a generous amount of time, that the avenues and platforms we're using to communicate about our brand and who we are changing. The ones that we need to be on are changing. The ones that we need to sort of, the ways that we need to get our message out are changing. And that's absolutely true. But I think like rather than it presenting a barrier and something that's terrifying that we can't get beyond, it actually creates an interesting opportunity. And so when I talk about branding, I don't talk about it from a like, you have to do this, and this perspective. I really talk about it about the way we think about who we are in the context of a company. And I really encourage you to do the same. If you feel overwhelmed by the idea that you have to, tell your story or tell the story of your art or your craft or your process or your store or your catalog or whatever it is, don't necessarily go right into like the process work. Think about who and what you are and who you want to be seen as in the community. This just says Knack Factory, so that is an unhelpful slide. The living organism in the context of what I was just saying, like I think often we think about who we are and what we're selling and what we're making as like a stationary product that we have to like broadcast a message about. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. Like I think that like us and like ourselves, our work and our practice and what we do and who we are in a community as a living organism, it's always changing, it's always shifting. The opportunities for telling our story or getting in front of a new audience are changing with it. The realities of what you do and the realities of the world where you want to see your product and service sort of sold or resonate are shifting on a regular basis. And so it should never be, this is who we are, this is how we brand, this is what our message is, and we're sticking to it forever and ever, amen. That that's not necessary. It's important that things shift, and it's important that you know that it's okay for things to shift, because if you don't, you can sort of feel like you're failing yourself all the time. Your message and your approach and your technique will shift with you, and that's very important. I think often people go, but my technique has changed, or but what my audience or what my customers want isn't what I expected it to be. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's going to happen throughout your career. Josh has been around for 3 years. Gabrielle's been around for 28 years in this business. I've been around for about 10 in this area. We see change all the time, and it's important to sometimes pivot with that. And sometimes it's important to stick with stuff, but it's important to know when to pivot. It's important to have goals and to recheck in on those goals on a relatively regular basis. Again, I think the reason why, I remember the first time branding resonated with me, the idea of what a brand was. Who said this? I think it was Clay Shirky. And he said, so if you think about a brand is ultimately, branding ultimately started with Quaker Oats, right? You're familiar with the Quaker Oats man. Do you know why the Quaker Oats man exists?
No.
Does anyone? The Quaker Oats man exists because you used to buy your oats at a store from a man. And then through mass production, through industrialization and putting your oats in a big bag and then selling them in a container, you didn't get it from them. You couldn't trust who you were getting your oats from anymore. You needed to see a picture of a person, which was a little bit of a lie, to go, oh, a man made this. It was a Quaker. So they weren't dirty, they were in their practice. They weren't wantonly having sex or doing drugs. They were just making their oats. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then I had an existential crisis about that. I was like, I gotta sell a simulacrum of who I am so people know their services come from me. That's weird. I don't want to do that. That's strange. And then after a decade of that existential crisis, I realized that no, really what people want, the desire there is still the same. The desire is that people want to know that the product that they get comes from the Quaker, right? They want you to tell the story of who you are and what you are as a means of them thinking that you're worthwhile when it comes to buying your product or buying whatever you have to offer. They want to know your story. And I know we talk endlessly about authenticity and telling your story and explaining who you are and explaining the background and telling, but that's extraordinarily important. People want to know that their stuff comes from real people. How many people have sold something that you didn't think you were going to sell until you talked to someone for a little while and they got a sense of who you are, what your story is? This is powerful stuff. Chris, what's your company? The Acadian. And what are you selling?
Pens and leather goods.
We didn't plan this, but I just know Chris by name. This is easy. You sell pens and leather goods, right? And your product is good, I'm sure. But when I see you were market testing your design and branding on Facebook, so I saw that. And it looks like it's plaid. What do I see you wearing? You're projecting sort of a personification of who you are in your product, right? It's not just naked pens and leather goods. Is there any beard hair in the marketing? Free tip. People want to know who and what you are, and they want to know that because it gives them a sense that it stands out from the other thing. They also want to know, and so when I talk about what we have as goals as a company, our goals is for people to know exactly the company that they're buying their product from, and we want them to like that company, not because we want them to like the company, but because we want to like ourselves as a company. If we like ourselves as a company, if we have something good to sell as a personal story goes, branding becomes a lot easier. We have clients in video that sometimes will approach, and the meeting stops when it becomes evident that they want us to lie on behalf of who they are in their product. We walked out of a gubernatorial meeting once in the middle of the meeting because it became evident that the person who was running wanted us to tell something that wasn't the truth about them. And I think like often again we get very upset or nervous about the idea that we have to tell a story that's not necessarily ours. No, we have to tell exactly our story. We have to tell our story, we have to tell the truth about it, we have to tell the things that we like about ourselves. Sometimes we have to tell the things we're super uncomfortable about ourselves, because that's what resonates. I told you earlier, unplanned, only because it's always in my head all the time, that I have imposter syndrome. I have a feeling that might resonate with some people. It's important to tell our story, because like our story is ultimately what sells our products. Again, thank you so much. Again, with Mad Gabs was the first product where I was like, this is not just a product, but this is a product where there's a person who is behind it. In any story I heard about the company, I heard about good people behind the product. So that's an important part of setting goals. Tell people who you are and figure out how exactly you're going to do it. Values is the other piece, and it's not dissimilar from telling your story. I think it's important to have values and explain to people what those values are and to stick out on that stick out in that way. It's really, first of all, if you have any value whatsoever, you're going to stand out against a lot of people who are selling stuff who don't. Think about how like social media platforms treat our data, right? At some point, they were just like, yeah, we'll just stop pretending we care. Like, we don't have any values whatsoever. We'll sell data. We'll have constant data breaches, and we will basically look for making as much money as possible while being an untrustworthy platform. Who stands out as a result? Trustworthy platforms. Who stands out as who stands out as a dating app? Does anyone use Bumble? Weird pivot in this conversation. Cool. That person uses Bumble. Bumble as an app was a response to like Tinder sort of being like a bottom barrel approach, and as a result of creating a different value in standing out in the dating world, it was able to find an edge. I think similarly, we are a company that's sort of outspoken about the things that we won't do, and that often helps us at the very least stand out in the context of companies that don't have those lines. And then within that, when we sort of talk about the values and the organizations and the people and the communities that we will work with, that creates points of resonance for people who want to work with companies that do that sort of thing. We do a lot of pro bono work for nonprofits. We do it for two reasons. One, corporate clients aren't creative. Corporate clients don't ask you to do the edgiest, most creative thing. Nonprofits will take any work for free. You'll be like, can this be inspired by the movie Needle and Panic Park from 1971? And they'll be like, sure, is it free? Yeah, whatever you want to do. Just do it, man. And so we do it as an excuse to play and find an audience in our play. And if people see the stuff that we do for play, they ask us to do more of that. So we do it for that reason. But the other reason is that it embeds us in the actual community. And if your community likes you, your community suggests other people hire you. I think that works works across the board. If you are a good community member, that works for you. People seek you out as a result. We've gotten, I would say, around like 20 to 25% of our inbound work not coming from people who we've worked with, but coming from people who admire our name. And we'll tell people that when they send a client or prospect in our direction, that these are people that you can like and trust, and that means the world to me. Because when I was a kid, first of all, I didn't know that like you could be in any business that wasn't running a sandwich shop or a radiator repair shop. Like honestly, I grew up in rural Maine. I had no idea. And then when I knew what business was, I thought it was all like Gordon Gekko and Wall Street. Like I thought like being in business was a heartless, soulless endeavor. And I think that like by being our most authentic and radical selves, like we stand out to people who are going to find us. And you're going to alienate people by doing that. I alienate people all the time. And I love it. Because at the very least, you know where you stand with everybody. They know where they stand with you. And the people who stick around, they stick around. They're in your corner. A lot of stand-up comedians will talk about, you can't have the whole audience. You have to have your audience. And I think that that's extraordinarily important. How much time do I have? I went way longer than expected. Okay, cool. I'm just going to say one more point, because we know that that will take a long time. The last thing is checking in. I'm just going to put this up in the meantime so you can see literally every place on social media you can find me. Check in on how you're doing. I think it's important. I think sometimes we'll go, here is our plan, here is who we are, here is how we're going to do it, and then we never look at that thing again. It's important at our company, we constantly talk about who we are, how we want to be that thing, how we want to be that company, what kind of work we need to do in order to do it. And we constantly tell both our audience of people in the community who know who we are and our staff, because they hold us accountable. Our staff will tell us if we're taking a job that doesn't make sense in the context of our values. And it makes me both proud and annoyed. And it makes me proud because they're doing the right thing, and it makes me annoyed because it takes up my time to deliberate with that. But I'm glad they hold me accountable. It's super important. I was saying the annoyed thing facetiously, but it's really incredible that we have created a culture of people that hold us accountable. And by being in the community and telling people who and what we are, we have people who talk back at us and say, we saw you doing the right thing, or why did you work with this company? Did you know this thing about this company? And I think it's really important to set that up as like natural points of check-in, but it's also important like every 3 to 6 months to go, is this working? Are the goals that we set working for the people who we're trying to get in front of? Are we doing the things that we need to in order to realize those goals? What's working, what's not? And I think that that's extremely important. And then finally, in order to do that, I should have said this first, but write everything down because you can actually check in on what your goals are. I think that's it from me. My goal was to basically just tell you that like this isn't a boring and soulless process. This shouldn't be. Sometimes when you hire a firm to do like the nitty-gritty work, it is, and that's why you hire someone else to do it and stand away. But there are elements of this you can absolutely do on your own. We're going to hear about ways that people did it on their own. And thank you so much for your time and attention. Please, if you have any questions, let me know via any of these ways. My email's on my website, Knack Factory, and we'll do a Q&A after. So thanks so much.
So we'll talk.
Needle and Knack Park.
Yeah, I'm open to it. Whatever, it's fine. So I'm Josh Rogers. I own a couple different Seaweed-related companies, and I'm very much in the thick of it right now. Like I've only been around for a couple years, so I'm gonna, I guess, talk about the nitty-gritty. I think Gabrielle is probably, she's got a much longer track record. She's probably had a lot more successes and can take the big picture. But as Alex was talking about, this has been a really interesting exercise for me because I got to check in on the last 2.5 years and see like what worked, what didn't. So this was my first company, and basically I got this idea. Quick background. I'm from Maine originally, but I was down in New York City for 12 years, and I worked at Zagat Survey, which is a restaurant guide, and then I was at Google as a content strategist around dining and travel. But I got the idea to move back in Maine, and I got really passionate about seaweed. And so I came up with this idea for seaweed tea as a way for people who know that seaweed is so good for you, want to have it as a daily habit in their diet, but the bag of dried seaweed is just in the back of their cupboard. This was marinating in my brain for a lot of years before I started making it. And the way I approached the brand was I worked with a couple of really close friends, people who I knew I wanted to work with basically for forever. And my friend Pat Corrigan, who's an artist in Portland, did hand lettering for Cup of Sea, and he created the logo, basically, which is a teapot with steam coming out, but the steam is kind of seaweed. And at the time that we created this, I really thought that my main market and the competitive space that I was going to be entering would be sort of the natural foods, kind of natural health market. And so I spent a lot of time looking at the packaging there, and a lot of the products were, very white, clinical backgrounds, things that conveyed a lot of authority and cleanliness, and so I had this big white background. And one of the things that I've realized since then, I'm very happy with the branding, but I've looked at my packages on the shelf in a store, and it's like, they're very hard to see because there's these beautiful pops of color, but it's basically just a kind of a white, brownish thing that you're seeing from across the room. So lesson one. One of the major successes, though, that I think we conveyed with this was, I knew that seaweed, for a lot of people, it's something that you're interested in. It's something that you know is good for you, but you're scared of it. People are not sure about it. So I wanted to make it really friendly. We chose a playful name. It's kind of a pun. And then on the back of this, what you can't see is a harbor seal, and the seal is drinking this cup of tea, and it looks very zen-like and relaxed. And it's cute and playful. So I think ultimately the branding was pretty successful. I think we probably need to take it, repackage it, and have more colors that pop and everything. But then, let me click it here. Over the couple years that I had been demoing my teas around the state, I realized that people liked the tea when they tasted it, but a lot of people weren't willing to just grab it off the shelf and take a chance. So I, through a couple different things coming together, opened an actual brick and mortar shop in Portland, Maine, which sells all things seaweed. So there's a ton of companies in Maine making food products, skincare items, candles, all sorts of things with seaweed. And so I wanted a place to showcase them all. And this idea came together super quickly. So the way we branded it was completely different from Cup of Sea. I basically just had a few months to figure out how to open a retail store and acquire all the inventory and hire people and everything. So I really outsourced the branding to a firm in Portland, and I went into it with the idea, similar ideas. It had to be approachable, so hence the colors and everything. And I also wanted to convey a sense with the name. The heritage seaweed kind of plays on the idea that, you've probably heard of heritage pork or heirloom tomatoes, so this foodie idea of heritage food. And it's also the heritage of this state. We have this amazing resource out there, and it's something to protect, but also to use and celebrate. As you'll see soon, though, I wasn't as involved in this, and ultimately I'm not so sure about the branding here, because I hired a firm that is very much a graphic design agency, and the way they approached it, and what I didn't realize at the time, though, was this is mostly typography and elements that aren't made by an artist necessarily. Like you have the kelp in the middle, which was drawn, but everything else in this is something that any graphic designer could make, essentially, with available fonts and things like that. And this is my lesson that I learned, and something hopefully you can avoid. So this is a company that is opening in South Portland, so a few miles from where I am. Maybe it's a competitor, right? They're selling seaweed. No, It's an edible cannabis company. And so if you look at the waves, there's the name, of course, but even if you look at the wave lines, they're exactly the same as mine, which actually we even have them in the cup of C. We have that element, although it's not quite so similar. And then the rest of it's just the line weights. It's not the exact same fonts or anything, but they're not that different from each other. And this goes into another thing, which is one of the big things that I'm trying to do is essentially create a brand around Maine seaweed. And I'm not the only person trying to do this, but 100 years ago, lobster was trash. Nobody wanted to eat it. They fed it to people in the Maine State Prison who complained about having too much lobster. And now it's this amazing thing that everyone loves and everyone wants to know where the best lobster roll is. And so I truly do believe that Maine seaweed is going to be a thing that's as big as Maine lobster. It's so much better for you on a sustainability level. It's a zero input crop that requires no land, no fresh water, pesticides, or fertilizer. And as the world population continues to grow, we're going to have to go to the ocean. Right now, the U.S. is importing about 95% of its seaweed, and so even just within the U.S., there's tremendous room to grow. So Maine is already leading the way in terms of how many seaweed companies we have. Our industry is really well established, it's really well diversified, and in terms of seaweed aquaculture, we have something like more than 100 kelp farm lease sites. So to put that in context, I think New Hampshire has 2. I don't think Massachusetts has any. Connecticut has a few. Same on the West Coast. There are only probably less than a dozen in each state out there. So we're really well positioned, and I really want to make Maine seaweed a brand, which leads me to one of the problems with this, which is it's just called seaweed. And so I was a writer and editor for 15 years before I transitioned into this job. And I know that, so they've chosen to do camel case lettering, which is when you have a capital letter within your word. But I know that most news organizations don't recognize that. And then the co on the end is also something that a lot of people dropped. So this company is going to be known as Seaweed when it's covered in many media outlets, and I've already seen this happen. I think there was an article either in the Bangor Daily News or the Press Herald that just called it Seaweed. Seaweed is opening in South Portland. So for me, this is an issue with building the Maine brand. So something I think that is important to think about when you're creating your brand is, at least a lesson that I've learned, is I always want, from now on, really original elements in my brand. I want at least an artist working on it. And I absolutely love and respect graphic designers. They're so important, but to have hand lettering is really important to me, to have some sort of artistic touches that no one else can really duplicate easily, I think is very important. But to the point of trying to brand Maine seaweed, my next sort of evolution is creating an event around it. So one of the reasons Alex was kind of praising me for getting back to him about the gift guide and being, Johnny on the spot with that, one of the reasons why I do that is not actually because seaweed, I'm worried that people aren't going to adopt seaweed. I think people actually have a tremendous open mind about it, even if they don't necessarily have it in their life. But I spent 15 years as a writer and an editor, and it's really hard to you're pounding your head against the wall with these people who don't have websites, or you want to cover them, and maybe they call you back, or so. my big advice for you, as being on the other side of that, is when someone from the media calls you or emails you, get back to them right away. It's free advertising. There's nothing more important than that. And just from being on the other side of it, it's like, it's a mystery why it can feel like pulling teeth. So anyway, that's my sort of $5 advice. But so Seaweed Week also grows out of my background in food writing, basically. And one of the things that I saw firsthand at the Restaurant Guide was that chefs are the rock stars of our day. Everyone, almost all food trends that become huge really do start with them or get popularized through them. So I wanted to connect Maine Seaweed to local chefs. And the thing is, so when I was in New York, literally my colleagues were professional foodies, professional food writers, and Portland and Maine are very popular places to go in the summer, as all of you know. So they'd always be planning their vacations and asking me, where's the best lobster roll? Who has really good oysters? And I always wanted Seaweed to be part of that conversation. And something like this is the way to make that happen. What I found out through organizing this event, which is essentially a restaurant week, where people are using local sea vegetables, is that there are actually a lot of chefs already working with them, but they're not necessarily shouting it out from the rooftops. And so this is a way to do that. So I have learned my lesson about, going too far in the sort of graphic design, typography kind of direction. And so I approached a local artist for this, but someone who I knew had also the graphic design chops that I needed, because I had worked with my friend who was an artist who was great, but didn't always have that side of the important equation. So this woman had both, and she was able to come up with something completely original, something that, I'm not worried about anyone kind of duplicating unless it was intentional. And again, I wanted it to be kind of playful and approachable, hence the crab there. One thing, and you were kind of talking about the Quaker Oats man, but this is another kind of marketing thing. There's a book I think it's called The Black Cat, and it's how the black cat has been used to sell everything from matches to batteries to just all sorts of unrelated things. And so, I think 50% of the time it's never a bad idea to put an animal in there. It's just cute, and people like them. So hence the crab. And it's a kind of a, we kind of put ourselves, we anthropomorphize these creatures, and so you can imagine yourself, I guess, in the crab's spot. Anyway, this is my attempt to brand Maine Seaweed, and it's gonna be a lot of fun, and hopefully I've learned some branding lessons, and hopefully you have through my mistakes. And thanks a lot.
It's kind of fun going last. I'm going to start by saying I didn't totally follow the homework assignment, and it's kind of cool to go after these guys and to hear everything in terms of your journeys, where you are on those. And I'm Gabrielle. I'm the maestra and the founder of Mad Gabs. I have a couple questions before I start with my story for you guys, because it's kind of helpful for me to know who I'm talking to. So I'm curious if you can show me who has a business already. Who considers that business a brand? Okay. Who's heard of Mad Gabs? Wow. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Can you all hear me? I can hear myself really loudly. All right, here we go. I'm going to attempt to take 28 years and condense it into something that is sort of a journey that we're all going to go on. And because I started my company when I was 19, I grew up with my brand. And this is obviously a picture of me before and now, and the squiggly line in between is really indicative of my spirit, which was something I didn't want contained. All I knew about growing up was I didn't want a job, I didn't want a cubicle, I didn't want pantyhose, I didn't want a boss, and that's about as far as I got. So in preparing for today, I've never really thought about the brand more than I have in the last few weeks. Because it's just been a part of everything I've done, and not a lot it's been very spontaneous and very inspirational, this journey. So what's funny is I've been thinking about what's behind the brand and the core brand values, and really they start with how I was raised. So just to highlight a few things, I was raised by a French mother. My father was a physician who was really a weaver, and we had tapestries all over my house. Everything was made from scratch. Everything was bought at the farmer's market, at the co-op. Everybody helped no matter how old you were. If you had a broken arm, it didn't matter. You were there, you were helping, you were in the kitchen. I was always curious, asked a lot of questions. I told a lot of stories. I asked questions in order to hear stories, and I believed very sincerely that people were good, always. A little too trusting, but in a good way, and that relationships are invaluable. So as I take you on the journey of the story of Mad Gabs, these are kind of the points that created the brand without me even really realizing it. So here we go. When I was 19, I was an anthropology major at UMass. I was working with monkeys, and I was failing math. They made me take 2 math classes in order to graduate, and I flunked freshman year, so I took it again junior year in a 3-week session, and I decided I was going to do something fun while I was taking that math class to sort of keep my sanity. And I took a workshop on how to give a basic massage, which I learned really quickly I didn't like doing. But the teacher brought in books on how to make stuff at home. And this was about 1990, 91. And there was a recipe for lip balm, so I wrote it down, put it in my pocket, went home and said, Mom, I'm gonna make some lip balm. And she said, well, Art's got bees next door. You should get beeswax from him. And I was like, that's what's in there? Awesome. So I went next door, got a chunk of beeswax from my neighbor, and started making it. Gave it out to people, like the story goes, everyone's like, can I get some more? My roommate took it, my mom wants some. So I'm giving it out, and it's coming out different every time, right? And then someone says, you should sell it. And I'm like, why? They're like, because it'd be fun, you'd have a business. I'm like, no way, man, that's businesses. I'm an anthropology major for a reason. I'm gonna do something with primates. This is so not my bag. But eventually it sounded like a fun little project. So I was like, well, I'll see if anybody would sell it. So a bunch of people said, sure, I'll sell it, but you need labels, you need displays, you're gonna need flavors, you're gonna have to call it something. So that little label and the logo, Mad Gabs, I literally came up with it in a 10-foot span. It took me to walk from my car into the door of the graphic designer shop because he said, come on Tuesday, we'll do something. And I thought, it has to have a name. And I just thought I was gonna do this one and done. I did not plan to have this be my life's work. So, and the funny thing is I thought about this literally at 2 o'clock in the morning last night, that the all-natural, reusable boxes, great flavors, and all these little things that were part of those core values. I was throwing it on because they meant a lot to me, and it was before you really saw that in anything, but literally not until last night did I really think about the list of core values and the displays. And the collaborative effort, like if you look at the logo, pay attention to the line around it, you'll see some changes there. I'm not a creative person, like visually. No one can read my writing. I can't draw anything. I'm not artistically inclined. I write. I love words. And so my friend Paige, we took, and this is funny because you guys both said this, we took her handwriting and made a font out of it because she used to handwrite everything. And she painted the back of those displays with paint, and then we slapped a sticker over it. So we got really fancy here because we had our handwriting made into stamps and actual font by Apple. I sent away for $100, and I had my own font in 1992, which was really exciting. This, what am I forgetting? Oh, I think we're good. So this was one of the first displays that came from wood from a local coffin company. I needed wood. I didn't have any money. I went through the yellow pages were my very, very best friend. I used them to source things, and I used, the old-fashioned maps, which you guys can remember, and I found that health food stores were the right market for me. We'd sold in all different kinds of stores, but the one that had seemingly my customer was a health food store, so I had these in there, and you'll notice we switched from plastic boxes into metal tins, And the branding messages are still all natural, cruelty-free, reusable. We're so used to that now, but nobody said this in 1992, and I didn't even think about it. It was just, that's what we're doing, so we just stamped it on everything. And let's see, that's my first trade show booth. You can see the logo evolving in the middle, and the displays became sort of all-encompass displays. And I have to add this too, because we talk about stories and connecting with people. That's my friend Kara, who got roped into doing this stuff all along. The book in front was letters people had written recommending me for something or some contest I lost but almost won. And it's the story, right? It's connecting with people. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I made that very like much a fact to everybody. So people were always trying to help me, which was very cool. Along those lines, so I did it as a hobby out of the trunk of my car for about 6 years. I sold to health food stores. Wherever there was a couch to sleep on, I'd go get the phone book and I'd highlight everything and I'd show up and say, hey, I make lip balm, would you like to buy some? And people would say yes. I'd go home, I'd make it, I'd ship it, they'd send me a check. That was about as complicated as it was. And after college, I did the obligatory trip out west to see what was out there. I had a lot of family. And I met, before I left, I met the founder of Stonyfield Yogurt. And he connected me with this organization he was on the board of. It's called the Social Venture Network. It was started by Anita Roddick from the Body Shop and Ben Cohen from Ben & Jerry's. And it was essentially a membership organization for company founders who were trying to do different kind of business. So I went and I was their admin. And I was like with the rock stars of my idea of cool business in the early mid-90s. No one had heard of, the seventh generation was there. There were people talking about nursing rooms for their employees, ESOPs, and it was like, this looks cool. Like this I can get my head around. One of the guys in the organization had an incubator, and he and I connected, and he said, you got a lot of energy, you got a great product and a good story, but every time I try to talk to you about business, you kind of like clog your ears and just want to talk about your product. You're not really like doing the business side of things. So he invited me into his incubator, and that's really when Mad Gabs went from the hobby to becoming a small business, and he legitimized my path in that it was like 9 months of accounting. He wouldn't talk to me until I had a balance sheet. I needed a marketing strategy. We did our first catalog, if you will, and you'll notice that we didn't actually print the logo on it because we couldn't figure it out. 6 months later, QVC, it's a home shopping channel, they came to Maine. I tried out with 300 companies. They picked 20. They ordered more in that PO than I'd sold the whole year prior. And I had to pour them all, I'm sorry, too fast. I had to pour them all one by one by one. It was a guaranteed sale. If I sold one, I had to take the rest back. And they said, do you understand what that means? And I said, yes, do you understand that I have a really big mouth? And if you put me on TV, I'm going to sell them all. And I did. And the next day they said, that was great, come back. So I went back for 3 more times. So with the money from QVC, I hired my first employee. We started 2 official partnerships, one in Portland, one in Saco, with Creative Work Systems and community partners doing piecework and display manufacturing. And in 1998, I had been making a shea butter bomb, and I decided I was going to call it Elephant Lube, and I was going to send 80 purple envelopes to the beauty editors in New York. There wasn't much of an internet, at least I wasn't using it regularly, and so I wrote all their names down in a book, and I handwrote all the labels. And it was crazy, because the Vogue was the first one that called. They literally left a message on the voicemail, on an answering machine, and I played it a bunch of times. I thought, that can't be what she's saying. And it was, and in 6 months, almost 40 magazines put us in, and that's really when the business became a brand. Then we had like this thing going on that was, and again, I didn't even realize that until the last couple of weeks, having this homework assignment. So it was written about in Business Week and more in 17, and then the recognition of being in those publications. I got an award from the Small Business Administration, Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and then came the game changers during that whole sort of blow up. So we went from natural products, and after all the media attention, we got into the gift industry, beauty industry, college industry. Things were blowing up. I'm getting married, and then I have my first child in 2000 and another one in 2004. So then I'm a mom, right? I'm trying to do these 2 things that never end with, there's never enough money or time for either, but I'm doing them at the same time. And of course I pick my kids, right? Like my kids are my priority. You don't get do-overs with kids. So I'm trying to keep my business growing and in check, but I'm home at the end of the day. I'm there for sick days, snow days, vacations. So there's a lot of smothering of Mad Gabs going on because I love my kids and there's the kind of mom I want to be, and I'm not going to sacrifice that. So this is happening in the background. They love this slide. They think it's funny that that's the one I picked to add them to it. But back to branding. So I'm raising the kids. We're growing. We're in all these industries. Everyone's like, you need more products. You need this. So we didn't have a lot. We had 3 products in this picture, but we just repeated them over and over again to make a splash. This was in New York at a trade show. Again, here's the logo. space around the words is changing, the circle around it's changing. We added since 1991. We're just sort of trying things left and right. Nothing is consistent. So here's what the line looked like. We had recently introduced the Moose Smooch. The Alaska sales reps we worked with asked for that, and we got to a place where everyone's like, who are you, and what is your brand, and who is your customer? So we paid a very big marketing firm to money we didn't have. We borrowed a lot of money to sort of, does anybody recognize this brand? Because this failed so miserably, and we spent so much money on this, and we took it. And that was, if you'll notice, the same year I had my second child. So not a great year. It was very busy, and we were ripping our house apart. So we paid money we didn't have. We went through exercises to figure out who we were, who our customer was, and I didn't drive this process. I was very much letting the professionals do that thing you talked about. And it didn't feel right, but I assumed it was because I was pregnant. I didn't understand it. I was too uninformed. Didn't have enough experience or whatever it was. We launched it. I've never had, not that it was that important, but people were writing to us saying, who do you think you are? This is not Matt Gabbs. This is, are you Fresh Sam cousin? We heard some really not great things. So what did we do? We took that moose and we told the marketing firm, don't touch the moose, just worry about everybody else. And we kept growing it in this Alaskan territory. We thought, let's run with that. That seems to be working. So to the moose, we added the bear. And then we added elephants, monkeys, giraffes, cows, seahorses, and we started going to the souvenir world. So we were the only made in the USA, natural organic body care, anything really, at these souvenirs. So you go to hotels, airports, resorts, national parks, state parks. Most of that product is not made here. It is not, there's no connection to it. You're buying a sweatshirt that says Acadia, that came from North Carolina, that was printed in North Carolina, that comes from somewhere else, right? So we were like, people would say, wow, this is great, you make it, you design it, this is cool. And so we did that for like 12 years, and we had snakes and buffaloes, depending on where you were in the country. We had something for you, and I reacted. Talk about pivoting and response. Oh, you want this display? Sure, we'll make one of those. You want that animal? Sure, we'll do that. So it was great. At this point, through a lot of different products, we're in all these retailers, LL Bean, Whole Foods, Yellowstone, hundreds of zoos and aquariums across the country. It was going pretty well. But it was crazy. There was no consistency. There was no real who is Mad Gabbs? Who are we selling to? And it was literally how do we set this up? Because we've got monkeys over there and elephants and giraffes and it was a literal circus. So there's the problem. And the biggest problem, in addition to that, was that people were buying our products on vacation, coming home and saying, hi, I live in Kansas. I was in Alaska, I bought some Moose Smooch. Where can I get it? Sorry, nothing for you. And no, people don't want to spend $6 to ship a $3 lip balm. That just doesn't make any sense. So we had 180 SKUs. It was way too many animals, and it was too many displays, too cluttered. So we decided we needed a strategic plan, which is something I'd never even heard come out of my mouth, right? But we needed to take our products and figure out where people bought lip balm, what were those markets, how do we get into them, who's our customer, and the mission of the company was always doing all these feel-good things because that's who I was. I didn't like talking about them. I didn't want to pat myself on the back for doing what everybody should do and, paying attention to inks and papers and post-consumer. There's just some, that everyone kept saying, people need to know you're doing those things. So we needed to integrate the mission back in. And the one thing that came up for me that was really authentic and unique was that I did this with an anthropology degree and zero experience. People helped me every single day. I walked into a store in Oakland and they said, do you have a distributor? This is great, you should have a distributor. I said, I don't know, what is that? And they said, it's someone who does what you're doing for you. And I thought, great, this is so exciting. And people educated me about buying and just all the pieces. So I thought, along the years we'd had young women starting 13, 14-year-old teenagers always wanted to come and put stickers on stuff, or we'd be at festivals or shows and they'd kind of loiter with their parents and say, this is great. College kids wanted to do internships, always women. We just had this natural gravitational pull. So we created our Gap Girls program, which is workshops, mentorships, internships, and employment for young women and girls interested in learning about business. We had to figure out how to put that in. So, back to the branding issue. We had to figure out the basic questions that they tell you, like in business school, but I don't know. Who is our customer? Why are they buying our products? Where does our mission fit in? Where is lip balm bought? What product should we be selling? How do we do this rebrand and who are we going to do it with? Because the big firm that was expensive didn't leave me feeling very confident that that was the right way to go. So I found a design brand firm in Portland, curious if it's the same one Josh used, and they said, yes, we can totally help you figure out what to keep, what to get rid of. Here's your plan. I was like, wow, that's too many zeros. Can we do this? They said, yeah, okay. How do you want to do that? And I said, I need to be part of this process. So 5 minutes, okay, I'm gonna go fast now. So I stood in the airport for 3 days with the packaging that they told me needed updating because I was sure that our moose was great. I asked hundreds of people, sat there all day, moose A, moose B, bear A, bear B. Nope, I was totally wrong. Data. I felt it, and that whole idea of like if something resonates, there are certain things you feel when you see your brand, you're like, yes, that captures, yep, I feel it inside, that's right. I usually trust it. I needed data at this point, and I was wrong. It was definitely the updated version. So we relaunched in 2016 with our brand. We created the MG brand, and we say that's our celebration of 25 years in business. It's also our non-whimsical, it's our everyday, feminine, playful, but pretty affordable organic body care line. And you'll see we went from 180 SKUs down to 50. We eliminated all of our expensive displays. We created a new website, a new trade show booth, and this is all on a shoestring too, by the way. I've never had like investors or any kind of, big backing. This is all just on the skin of our teeth, which I think is really important. And then we had, so we had the menagerie line, we call that our classic line, and then our MG line. Old displays, new displays, sleeker, smaller, less footprint. There's the trade show evolving. There's our Gab Girls and our new location in Yarmouth. If you're ever down and want the nickel tour, please come. And then just more images of how the brand looks now. And then the brand pillar. This concept was introduced to me, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. Again, it's one of those things they probably teach you, but I learned because someone told me over tea. And if you have your brand pillars, like what makes you you, what makes you different, what do you want to hang your hat on? And for us, it's our products, the quality of our products, the way they look, and what they communicate as a message. It's the story, and I'm the face of this brand, and I'm reluctantly like owning that because I know it's really important, and I love telling my story, and I love, because I really feel like if I can do something like this, like really, like anybody really can, because I'm so not qualified, but I'm still doing it, right? And the Gab Girls is the arm that, and I have sons, so this is like my connection to girls. This is the little me's who want to learn, they're eager, they're excited, and they make it worth doing. So it's coming along, but in the end, it's never ever over. It's kind of like house cleaning or laundry. It's constantly evolving. You have to get feedback. You don't know everything, but you do have like that voice inside, and it's good to go with it and then check it. That feedback is critical. And consistency is important, and really knowing who your products resonate with, and just let the rest fall away, right? It's like those are your people, and there's more of them. Don't try and convince them, convincers. And your brand pillars are really what you go back to at the end of the day. Does what I'm doing fit into one of the pillars? Maybe there's 2 pillars or 4, but you can't have 20. And then your decisions can be made from there. But really, it's a journey, and it's never over. And I'm 28 years in, and we spent half the ride up here talking about the branding things we're working on right now. And it's exciting, and I guess that's the joy of it. Is it's a never-ending journey. So hopefully there was some helpful stuff in there. I'm really looking forward to questions and listening to you guys, but I think that's the end. Yep, it is. Thank you.
It resonates with all of our experience. One is Josh's lesson learned, and then your lesson from the beginning with having a tactile logo. Like you didn't go to a graphic designer. You sort of avoided, or you went to a graphic designer, but it was based on hand script. You needed something that felt organic. My podcast logo, local artist Tim Burns drew. The highest selling thing that Knack Factory ever put out was a T-shirt to benefit the ACLU, and it was hand drawn by a woman named Sophie Kengalosi. I feel like in a digital world in particular, tactile sort of organic product in both logo and presentation of who you are is really important. Can you talk a bit about how do you stand out in a digital world when with these approaches?
Yeah, well, I'm actually maybe a good person to ask for this because so I worked at Google for 5 years, and about halfway through, I thought I was going to get fired because I didn't have a phone. I had one of the old brick phones, and it was the year that mobile searches surpassed desktop searches, and so I finally got a phone. So I'm very I'm, savvy as just your typical person online and everything, but I'm very suspect of it as well, and I love the tactile, and I'm a failed art major anyway, so yeah, I absolutely agree, and it's interesting with my second brand, Heritage Seaweed, the store, and I think this is probably in retrospect a mistake, but I really thought to myself, no one's going to know what this is. It's a seaweed store. That isn't a thing. And so I felt like the brand had to actually be kind of generic and telegraph something that, looks like every other kind of hipster kind of store that you see out there. And in retrospect, that was probably not the best thing to do. But yeah, I mean, I just generally agree. I think you have to find people out there who are creative and idiosyncratic, or maybe you yourself are, and you have that instinct of just being a little bit left of center, I think is important. I thought it was interesting what you said about, you trust your gut until you were wrong. That time you did the A/B testing with the moose logos, and I found that to be the same. I feel like I have a pretty good sense of just how to make decisions, but then every once in a while I'm wrong. And one of my favorite things to do, which I would encourage everyone to do, is just hand your product to someone and say to them, tell me about this. It's an open-ended question. It really allows people, it's not, is it good, is it bad? It gets people just talking and telling you what they see, which is super valuable. I guess I've sort of strayed from the topic, but.
What I think is funny is when I think about that question, my logo, the one that we keep using, is the one that I did on mistake a long time ago. The only thing I did was squish it together. And I guess I go back to the story being the background of whatever visual you put out, right? Because you want your collateral to speak as well as whatever the product is, so they have to go hand in hand. And I tried Mad Gav's logos without that font, and it's kind of jarring. I tried like the Trader Joe's thing. Every different, country has a different version of a Trader Joe's, and I couldn't get away with it. Joe can do it, but I apparently can't. But I do think there's so many artists that have, like, one guy drew the moose, somebody else drew the lips, somebody else did handwriting. Like, that kind of authenticity and the connection with the person who gets the brand brings to it something that's, you can't pay for that. You can't find that anywhere else. So, I don't think about these things. I just kind of do them and see what happens, but maybe there's a better way.
I feel like that's the like, I know Pat Corrigan who did the art for the first logo. I feel like when you are trying to, the artist I'm thinking about sourcing, and you were drawing from your experience, I think when we're trying to, like, say who we are in our product, like, the art that resonates with us is one of the best ways to do that. I'm gonna ask you selfishly one more question before I ask the audience. I know you're there, and I know you have questions, but one thing that came up that I found fascinating, that resonated with, I think, sort of all of our experience in one way or another, and I've seen the opposite happen, is not a failed, but a bumpy, maybe failed, a failed and a bumpy brand approach or solicitation with a firm. And I've heard of horrendous failures, and I've heard of people, especially when you're investing that money, it go one way or another. It's rarely neutral. It's rarely like, that's cool, I guess. I had a conversation with Mike Wiley, the Big Tree Food Group, who's the chef at Hugo's and Eventide. And I said, we were talking about branding, and I said, how'd you feel about the process? And he said, well, if you asked me going in, and they did, because I was one of the partners, but if you asked me going in, like, if we were going to spend this much money on a brand exercise or a walk-in cooler, I was fighting tooth and nail for a walk-in cooler. And now they attribute a good deal of their success to, obviously, their talent. I mean, they're extraordinarily talented, they make extraordinary product, but to their brand identity being something that people see nationally and identifying with. That's great. And then there's the opposite side, where our company was going to be called Pizzazz Factory. And we had a brand intervention And you had a bit of a rocky approach. You had a failed approach. Can you talk about how you might have approached those differently with what you know now? Like, would you have been more involved from the get-go, or what would
Well,
that
I
have
think that for me, when I look at having done it in a bunch of different ways, it's an exercise for you. Whether you're a standalone person, a company of 5 or a company of 100, you're paying for expertise to bring in discipline, to ask you the questions: Are you reaching your goals? Are you getting where you hope to be getting with what you're doing? If not, what do you need to look at? So sometimes for me, it's a graphic designer who I say, it looks like this, it's kind of blue, no, it's bigger, it's blockier, it's sans serif, whatever. And then the right ones are like, got it. And then this, and I'm like, maybe. So I feel like I'm at a place where I need the discipline, but the branding exercise on a big level, I don't see a lot of value in it for me right now. I might do it again someday, but that's something like that I don't have enough faith in that process. I really sort of have learned to trust myself, and I know my brand at this point, and I do need those checks and balances, but I think branding exercises can sound like something big companies do, and really it's figuring out your values, it's figuring out the feeling you want people to have when they look at whatever your product might be, and am I communicating that with the things I put out there, you know, and there's simple at-home brand, you can DIY your own branding exercise, you know, it doesn't have to be complicated and overwhelming, I don't think, and sometimes that's the best place to start as like a practice round.
Yeah, I would say that for Heritage Seaweed, I forgot one of the most important lessons, which I used before and since, which is start small, iterate, and product test, user test, basically, which is something I learned at Google, like, you know, these amazing apps that we use. A lot of them start literally on a piece of paper, and we would be kind of just like drawing out the way the app would look, and you'd have a whole stack of pages, and you'd test it with someone, and they would literally like swipe the paper, and based on what they would do, you'd put whatever screen would be up there, starting really small, and with the MVP, you probably heard minimum viable product, because it's going to need to change. And so with the store, I got the idea, I think, in December, and the store opened in July, and I thought, oh my God, I need a great brand, because I'm gonna have signs, and I'm gonna, you know, it just needs to look all finished. And I think in retrospect, like, I didn't even get my sign up until a couple months ago, just because of city approvals and different things. So I think if I was gonna do it again, I would remember to slow down, find someone who I really wanted to work with, be really involved in the process, and you don't have to have, like, it took you how many years to get your final brand, and you can have a kernel there that starts, that's something really great, but you can keep building and honing that. So start small, you don't have to spend, you know, so much money right up front.
And never underestimate the power of your grocery store or the sidewalk, because you don't need thousands of people. Once you get to like 100 people, this feedback, it's going to repeat itself over and over again. So go stand somewhere and just talk to strangers, because literally people love to give you their opinion, right? So it's a totally undervalued resource.
All right, who has questions? There's a microphone floating. I see the beginning of a question. Oh, what is it?
Well, basically,
Oh, this guy has a microphone. Sorry. What is your name? So I don't know who this
my
is.
name is Heather Spencer,
Okay, Heather Spencer has the microphone.
and I'm an artist, like drawing with graphite pencils and transitioning to pastel. So to switch this into an artist kind of branding themselves, I'm wondering, aside from your signature being the same, like, I guess I have my own style, but trying to, create a brand for yourself so that people going into shops are like, oh, that's a Heather Spencer, that type of thing. I don't know if you could help with any ideas that way.
I just have something really quick on that front. I think part of the branding for you, and not everyone's super comfortable with, but whatever ways you can find to do this is a good thing, is kind of telling your story and using Instagram, especially for artists, and Facebook. Even if you don't want to be pictured, it's like, I follow artists on Instagram, and it's just shots of them, their hand, and they're doing their thing, or they show the progression of a work, or something like that. People want to know you. So I would say that's a way to do branding.
Yeah, our company bought, in the past 2 years, probably like $10,000 worth of art from people that we just found on Instagram watching their process. Like that's exclusively how we saw artists that we bought products from. That's a perfect one, like watching the process. One guy's name is Mike Gorman. I ended up actually getting a couple $1,000 in tattoos from him too, so like it works. But he just would listen to jazz and draw and just talk to you about his history in New York in the 80s. It was like, yeah, and that's like Mike's brand. And then there's a kid who actually used to live with me in Cornish. He used to rent a room from me, and I didn't know he was a painter. And then I started following him on Instagram. His nickname's named Facciano. Amazing paintings, and we're buying two for a new office space in a month. So yeah, that's like I can't say enough about the value of projecting your process and your work at least somewhere where people are looking at it on a regular basis.
And I kind of go a different way. I agree with all of that, but like the first thing I thought of is like going way outside. Like, is there a thing you can integrate that is true to who you are? Say you love blue. Can all your frames be blue? Is the frame on your website blue that matches your card that matches this? And they walk in a gallery and all the frames are blue. They're like, oh, that's a, forget your name, Heather. Yeah. So you know what I mean? Like if there's something, but it has to be real. And there has to be a way to explain that story of, well, why the blue frames or whatever that piece is. But when you can grab people, because unless they know your style, it's going to be a piece of art that they're going to have to get close to, read the name, or recognize it. I think that might be, but if you have something bold and big like that, I mean, I don't know if that's logical, but something like that is, you can translate that to everything you do. That can be your signature. So that's where my brain goes.
And it might not apply to your experience, Heather, but it might resonate. This might be to someone else in the room. It's just like make it easy for people who might potentially want to buy what you have to sell. Make it clear where your art is available. Have high resolution. You don't have to have a professional photographer shoot them. No offense to the professional photographers here. But have high resolution photos on the site in case someone at a publication is taken with them and wants to feature them. I have been that person many times. Don't have photos of your art locked in a website. I don't know why there are websites where it makes it almost impossible to find your art and link it and source it in a news article, but it is for some reason. Call reporters if you think you have a story, or if your story is just you. I'm sure Josh can speak to this. I can speak to this because I watched this happen over 15 years. News departments that used to have 6 to 8 people in them now have 1 person in them. And it's devastating for democracy. It is wonderful for people who are selling a product. Because if you can call up and go, I have a story, I'll make reporting the story easy for you. I have great images, you can come to my studio, whatever. You've done 75% of the work for someone who needs to fulfill a content goal that is doing the work of 8 people.
The other thing I think of, is merch. Like if you're not in a position to buy art, is there a way to give people a piece of you in an artistic form that you feel good about that they can take with them in some way, whether it's littler art or on something? I mean, merch can be not great, but it can also be an amazing way to get the eyeballs on your work and get attention for that. So never underestimate the power of swag.
Sorry, please go for it. I was going to say, speaking to that, I met a photographer in LA. I saw, his name's Dennis McGrath, and I saw a photograph of his on a t-shirt in a second-hand store. And his signature was on the shirt, and I called him, and we hung out for a while, and then I bought one of his pieces from him. So I don't know how intentional it was for that t-shirt to end up in a second-hand store, but having his art somewhere else where people were like t-shirts are so easy to print now. So easy to print, and people, I had mugs, that's exactly right, and postcards and posters, and it's all so easy now. I had a friend of mine's in a band called Lula Wiles, and she oh really? I just saw them last night too. She came up with a joke band called the Traveling Ovaries, and so I made a Traveling Ovaries shirt based on the Traveling Wilburys t-shirts, and I made them for the band, I made them for a bunch of people that we know, And every time I wear that shirt, someone asks where to buy one. Like t-shirts are ways to get it out, and it might feel weird and cheap because I know that you're an artist and you have integrity. And putting your friggin' art on a t-shirt must feel dirty, but it's a canvas.
Yeah, one thing that I just thought of too is there's a local artist in Maine called Abby Tensia, and she's got sort of a whimsical style to her, and probably everyone here remembers the ice disc in Westbrook. I mean, it was like a world news for like weeks, and she, you know, authentic to herself, but she found a way she did a t-shirt of the ice disc in her style, and I can't remember whatever slogan she had on it, but it was really funny, and it just, I think, kind of caught fire, and it was just it was an honest way for her to just root herself in Maine. Obviously, this wasn't some random meme that was out there. It was very authentic, but it was just a fun way to sort of get to know her and kind of get swept up in something that was just going on. So if you can connect it to the real world sometimes, I think that could be a fun way to do it.
Yeah, like two years ago, I think, we had this woman who I talked about earlier, Sophie Kangalisi, draw it was a flyer for a fundraiser we were having. It was like two like little genderqueer cherubs holding a banner, and that was going to have the information on the flyer. And then the nevertheless she persisted situation happened with Mitch McConnell and Elizabeth Warren, and so we just put nevertheless she persisted in the banner and put it on a pay-to-order T-shirt, and we were like, we'll give 100% of the profit to the ACLU, and like Glamour, as you know, the importance of it, like Glamour picked it up, and then so I think we gave the ACLU like $7,600 or something from that. And sometimes it's just a matter of like taking something that already exists and repurposing it to put it in the context of something that's happening. Again, I know you have integrity. I'm a corporate artist, but that's an important point of finding an opportunity and finding a moment. Also, that 17. Sorry, I said this like I remember so well that 17 that came out with Matt because it said on top it said Blink-182's Mark Hoppus talked about his punk rock mom. And I remember I would go and hang out with like my friends, all my friends in high school were girls. Gender fluidity conversations would have been very helpful when I was a kid. And we would just like read those 17s. I remember being like, this company's from Maine. Anyhow, my fan moment about Mad Gabs aside. Who has another question?
We answered all their questions already.
We were very good.
My name's Vicky Fox, also known as the Stick Chick. So I work for Rustic Woodwork, and I make one piece at a time. And I post stuff on Instagram, but how do I get from making my pieces in my studio to Instagram to selling them?
I love that you're the Stick Chick, so you're starting with a brand. So that's a handy beginning to this conversation. You sell things.
I have so many questions. Do you make, everything's one of a kind?
Right.
Well, do you want to sell them virtually or in real life person?
I'd go either way.
Okay. Well, there's, the craft fair route, I'm sure that you've looked at that. Maybe that doesn't, if you're shaking your head no, okay, we'll move on from that. But there's,
I've done a lot of craft fairs, but I more often than not come home feeling frustrated because maybe I sold two pieces
Yep.
and it costs me bunches of money
right.
to enter, etc.
Would you be open to making things that are not one of a kind? Like, is it more important to sell what you make as one of a kind, or do you want to put your name out with something that's signature of you that you would make 10 of them? There's so many questions. There's price point, there's visibility, do you want to meet people and sell through a gallery where you have an opening and there's attention for your work? There's so many different iterations, and it comes down to what you want. Do you want to make it and be hands off? Do you need a gallery representative to take your work? I'm not an artist and I don't profess to know what to do, but I I would have questions around where you want to spend your time and energy and talents, and then it would go from there. So it's a conversation of, do you want to make? Do you like to sell? Do you want to tell your story? And then from there, the different paths open up. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so I feel like we have to have a conversation. We can talk later, but I feel like it's really, without knowing all those answers, it's really hard to say which way to go. But I have lots of ideas. I have
Well,
lots
I
of
think
questions.
the thing that's unique about the things that I make is that each one is different. And if I tried to mass produce them, it would be really hard because, for example, I make a lot of things using driftwood. So how do you reproduce driftwood?
Well, so maybe the reproduction isn't the way to go. Maybe the idea of, like what Alex was saying, explaining your work, finding a way to integrate storytelling with Instagram, and then at the end having it for sale on Instagram. But it's really, here's the story of how I made this, and you build it up by telling your story over a series of posts, and then people can buy through that. So because if you're doing that and you're a customer, that's the kind of thing you would want to see, you know?
Yeah, I want to know more about the stick shirt.
Yeah.
Like know more about who you are and how that came about and why this is important to you. All that value stuff sticks out to me in a huge way, and like that's the stuff that draws me, that makes me take a second look at something in a way that I might not have looked before. And I also think about like artists who maybe their passion is in the stuff that they make individually, but they have like one print or something that can be mass produced that people know them for, and that's able to be something that's standardized and recognized by a larger audience, and then that's the buy-in and you buy more from them. That's a good approach. But yeah, a follow-up conversation after I think is great. How are we on time? We have 1 minute.
Yeah, I would just add to that too. I think the power of place is important too. So people want things from a certain place in Maine. So if you can make that connection, that's good too.
Awesome.
Can you talk a little bit about how much time you devote to social media? And are you using apps like Panelly for Instagram? And are you personally doing it, or do you pay off somebody else to do it?
Yeah. That's, oh God.
Yeah.
That's a dark and deep question. It's a good question.
I will answer because I actually, for the first time, have somebody doing social media with me. And it's the first time I have somebody doing something I haven't done because I obviously didn't grow up with social media. So she's right over there, and she's really awesome. Her name's Katie Casper. Yes, we use Planoly. Yes, it takes a lot of time. It's worth its weight in gold. And because, well, you guys seem to know Mad Gaps. A lot of people don't. And as we make the leap into this other market where people buy lip balm, we need to tell our story over and over and over again. And it's critical, and you need to do it well. And it's the most, I think, get your image and your products and all that right. But once that's done, it's the best money, and it goes so far now. It's really an amazing platform.
So is there any way to look at how much time, to weigh the difference between the amount of time and effort and the amount of translatable sales?
Not always.
Is there any place to even begin to look at that?
Depends what you're doing, where you're selling, what you're trying to measure. Are you measuring awareness? Are you measuring sales? I know.
You could go down a super deep black hole on this, or rabbit hole, not black hole. But Rich Brooks, who's giving a talk next, he has a podcast about all this stuff, and even if you just listen to like 3 of those podcasts and look through the subjects,
Yeah.
it'll get you to a better place. It'll get you to a more comfortable place. It won't get you to the end because a lot of us just keep asking these questions and trying to figure it out. But there are answers out there, but they're also highly personalized to what your goals are.
Did you say that name again, the podcast?
What is Rich's podcast name? Agents of Change? Is that it? Agents of Change by Rich Brooks.
Agents?
Agents, like a secret agent.
Agents of change, yeah.
Not Asians of Change. Agents. That is a podcast. Oh, we gotta go. They're giving us a little thing. So we're like, hey, this could go on forever, but it's gonna be awkward forever. Thank you so much for coming.